Good evening. This is our last video of the night, and that would be a discussion of getters and setters within a class. Now remember, classes are blueprints, and they can only create objects that have the functionality that we write into them. And so that includes the idea that we need to be able to have some functionality that lets us change things, lets us change our width, or lets us change our length on the fly. Currently, we can only set it with our rectangle class, or a rectangle constructor, rather. And let's talk about how to make changes. Well, first, we're going to make something called a getter. And a getter, or an accessor, is the official formal name, return values of private variables. Setters, mutators, return or change the values. So this is something that we have to talk about. We have to talk about this private keyword here. Private means that we can't access or modify this variable outside of this file itself, this class itself. Let's try to, just to see if we can. Maybe watch the world burn when we find out that I'm wrong, which doesn't happen more than every day. So, rect1 dot width. We can use dot notation to access a variable within an object. In this case, we can't modify it, so it says the field rectangle.width is not visible. Now, obviously, it's visible in our other class. We can't see it here because it's set to private. If I were to change it here to public and go out here, and my error, well, maybe if I set it to 5, my error would go away. Whereas if I go back here, change it back to private, you can see that my error pops up again. It says it's not visible. So setting something to private is a way to prevent other programs from changing your setup, changing your values that you want control over. The idea of public versus private is an idea about control. You are the one who needs to be able to control what happens in your programs, what happens to all of your data. If you have, for instance, a rectangle, and someone decides to do this, that is an issue because negative length is not really defined. You could decide to define it as going left or going right, stretching out left, stretching out right, but in this case, we're just creating an object that's very static, that doesn't really move around or anything, and so as a result, this is nonsensical. And we'll get a negative perimeter. What's a negative perimeter? Doesn't really make sense. So we want control so that no one ever does that. Now, we may not implement that functionality on our own, and we may have to put limits within our constructor on setting those values to negatives or positives, but we have control over that, whereas if we set this to public, we don't. We control things within our methods as opposed to through letting others use our variables. And this is really the main distinction, an important distinction between public and private. Public variables can be accessed and changed by others directly. Private variables cannot. So we use these things called getters, which access for us, and setters, which mutate for us. And they have to, if someone wants to use our stuff, they have to go through the things that we've written, the ways we want to access our data. So public void get width. Oh, that's not right. Public double get width. Public double get width. So this looks very similar to what we've seen before. Public can be used elsewhere. Double, we're making a contract to give back a double value. And get width, well, that's going to tell me what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to give back the width. So what do? I just say return width. And that's sufficient. Getters are really easy. Sometimes you want to do a little more with them. Sometimes you want to change, you want to make a record update whenever someone accesses data. You can certainly do that. Maybe you want to do a database update, but we're not talking about that quite yet. And that's not actually a topic that's covered in AP, which is really what this tutorial is designed for. For Java 1 students, we do get into databases, but we'll be looking at that later. So this will get our width and return it to the user. They don't have to access it on their own, they use our getter. So here we will return the width of this rectangle. Gets the... So we're just making comments as we go to make our lives a little bit easier. And again, later on, not now, we'll try to make something that can get our, or that can mutate our data, that can change our data. Mutate, change, set, all words for the same thing. So public, well, we're not going to make a contract to give back data because we don't really want to necessarily tell anyone what we're doing here. We just want to do it. So we're going to use this word void to say that we're not making a contract to return anything, to give anything back. And then we'll say set width. And here, we're going to say, how are we going to set our width? Well, I don't have anything to set with. What did I do up here? Well, I put a variable that someone else can put information into for me that I can then use. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to take in a double. I'll call it W. Again, I can name it here because it only exists within the context of this method. This method can't see it. It gets destroyed as soon as this method is over. So I can have two double W's. That was a great choice of letter. And the one up here is limited to just being used here. The one down here is limited to just being used here. This parameter, this argument, this thing I'm putting in, taking in to use, is only usable within this method itself. So what do we want to say? We want to say that we want to change the width. We want to give the value of W to the width. And if I wanted, I could do all sorts of fancy things here, like if width, or if W is less than 0 or less than 1, don't do anything. Or if W is greater than 1, we can set the value. But I don't want to worry about that right now. That's sort of the argument for why private, setting your variables to private and changing them with accessors or setters is the way to go, because we get to control what's going on. Now, generally, setters and getters are very simple until you do more advanced things. And so right now, we're just going to leave it at this. The width we wish to change our rectangle to. Okay, and changes the width Okay, and so you can see that I can do this with width. I'm just going to do a nice copy pasta to do this with height, or length in this case. So I'll paste that. Errors because I have things named the same. And I'll change this to L even though I don't have to. And we'll change this here. Just wherever we see the word length or width, we'll change it to length. And now we have setters and getters for all of our variables, all of our fields here. And that's pretty useful. And if I wanted to do that, I could say rect1 dot get width. Maybe I want to get the width. And maybe I want to print this out. And I'll see that it prints at 5. What if I want to set the width? Well, I have to set it to something. Let's set it to 45. Oh, hey, now it's set to 45. And if I did get area, that'd be affected by that change as well, because we're just calculating based on the values in our fields. Okay, what if I wanted to do this all in like one line? That would be weird, wouldn't it? That'd be pretty cool. So let's say, well, let's not change it in one line, but one thing I could do is something like this: rectangle1 dot set width, and I wouldn't do it here. I'll do it right here. Rect1 dot set width, rect2 dot get width. If I want to match the width, well, maybe I want to do this because I want to make similar rectangles or something, and then I can print out rect1, and notice that rect1 is now changed to a width of 2.5, which was rect2's width, but still has its original length of 5. Whereas if I print out rect2, it didn't change at all, because all I'm doing is getting the width here. The thing that's being set is the width of rect1. So this is a lot of information. We've made an entire class with a ton of functionality, and we've done it sort of on our own with all sorts of interesting things that we can do with it, even with something as simple as a rectangle. If you wanted, you could expand this to boxes. You could make a box out of rectangles, but I'll save that for another video. Have a good night.